Return of the Mount Hua Sect. Chapter 275. So prestigious sects don't have heads. Watching Baekchun walk up the stage, Hyunjung clenched his fists. Baekchun. He clenched it even harder. Was he afraid of Baekchun losing? It wasn't like that. Hyunjung had unconditional trust in this man. If Chongmyung was the one making a mess, then Baekchun was the one purifying Mount Hua with great care. If Chongmyung was the child who would not even blink their eyes in the face of a fight, then Baekchun was the child raised with care who might even get blown away by the wind or broken with a touch. So, naturally, he felt concerned. Isn't he the great disciple of Mount Hua? Yes, he's the greatest among the other disciples. Then he must be the fiercest of all the children we've seen. Right. He couldn't say anything else. He just stared at Baekchun and those who were looking at him cautiously. The atmosphere is clearly different from yesterday. Yesterday, it seemed like they were all saving their own faces. But after Chongmyung became active, the disciples of Mount Hua continued their streak and now everyone was acting cold. What are they so afraid of? Hyunjung bit his lip. Afraid of getting hurt? Or afraid that the balance of power that they had struggled to keep was being disrupted? This should be done by first-class disciples. If this was a place where real sword battles were happening between first-class disciples and the elders of another sect, then he could understand their nervous expression and reactions. However, it was disappointing for him to see these old people being overly passionate about the activities of young people who could not yet be called the true power of a sect. Does this mean this is how it works? Hyunjung couldn't hide his disappointment and sighed. No, I was wrong. It wasn't that the others were wrong. The one in the wrong was Hyunjung. If there were two sects with the same amount of skills, Hyunjung and another person who were the sect leaders, then which sect would develop more? Hyunjung, who always conceded to others, would step back from everything and be pushed around by the other sect leader. Weren't we always told to be careful with time? Hyunjung nodded slightly, looking at the Shaolin sect leader standing ahead. The abbot must have seen all of this. Of course, a good person could be a good sect leader. However, those who could not take care of their own and could only hope for a collective agreement would only be buried. To keep one's position, one needs to have a goal-oriented mind. The moment he understood that these seemingly frivolous actions were for the sake of their own sect, Hyunjung's eyes shone. I need to be more passionate, to protect these children, to not let anyone get in their way. Hyunjung learned a thing from the reaction of the other sect leaders. If it is Baekchun, isn't he the kid who defeated the sword dragon of Wudang? Now, he is called another of the 5 dragons instead of the sword dragon, right? White dragon, was it? At someone's words, the Wudang sect leader smiled brightly. Our child has been taken care of. However, I am grateful to this child too. Jinhyun has been focusing on his training ever since he lost that day. The child who believed in only his talent is now putting effort into it, so I am looking forward to what he will show in the future. That would be a good thing. Probably. Hodo Jinin looked at Hyunjung and smiled. The results of this spar will be different from the previous one. It would be great if they could meet here. The old Hyunjung would have spoken modestly and timidly at the words of his opponent. But now he knew. Lowering yourself was fine, but never lower the position of Mount Hua. Even if he was called naive and narrow-minded, he wouldn't let them talk about Mount Hua. That was what a sect leader was supposed to do. If Wudang's sword dragon has achieved such a thing, I would be congratulating them. But Hyunjung smiled. Baekchun's talent is astonishing even for me. It is hard to imagine that he would lose to an opponent he has already beaten once. Although Jinin looked startled at his comment. It seems like the results of yesterday's spars has given confidence to the sect leader. It isn't that. How can the results give me confidence? It wasn't the outcome that gave me the confidence, but the skills of my kids. Everyone went silent at that. Although Jinin looked at Hyunjung without saying anything, and his mouth was wide open. A shrill voice came from the other side.
To discuss that, my child will have to be defeated.
The eyes of the two turned at that sound. The Hebei Peng family head, Peng Hua, looked at them with a dissatisfied expression. Both of them then noticed that the opponent of Baekchun, who stood there, was from the Hebei Peng family. Excuse my words, Lord. We were short of thought. Peng Hua snorted loudly and crossed his arms.
My Doan is not a famous child, but his skills are second to none. So open your eyes and watch carefully.
Although Jinin didn't respond to that, and Hyunjung looked at Peng Hua, who was holding back his anger. Even the head of the Hebei Peng family confidently speaks about the children of his family. So what does it mean to put our faces first instead of the children's? With an apologetic heart, he looked at Baekchun. Baekchun, win. His eyes looked at the clasping hands, yet he trusted the guy. Lightly. Baekchun lightly applied force to the sword he was holding, slowly releasing it, and then repeating, I know what they are saying. The opponent was Peng Do-won of the Hebei Peng family, a name he had never heard of, but a name associated with the representative of the Hebei Peng family. Still, Baekchun couldn't feel any threat from him. All he could feel was his own heart beating steadily, and the gaze of Hyunjung, who was looking at him. Sect leader. In the past, Baekchun was a person who only thought about his own growth. But after meeting Chongmyung and going through many things, he learned something new. What a wonderful person his sect leader was. The man knew about Baekchun's background and still accepted him without any questions. I will make Mount Hua the greatest sect. In other words, he would make the sect leader of Mount Hua the most respected and notable person in the Central Plains. And in order to do that, he had to defeat the one in front of him. Baekchun looked at Peng Do-won with careful eyes. However, the opponent attempted to provoke him. Such cheeky eyes. He put the sword onto his shoulder on one side. You seem to have lost your fear because you people did a good job yesterday. Baekchun, hearing that, sighed. Why do my opponents come like this? It would be better if it were someone who would just fight normally. And exasperated, Baekchun said, It isn't like that. I am still a little scared. That mouth of yours is shiny like your face. Baekchun grabbed his sword, realizing that it was too late to hear good words from him. If you don't intend to fight with words, you can start. No, I'll give you a chance. A chance? Peng Do-won chuckled and said, If you abstain from the fight and head down, I won't hurt your face of pride. I get annoyed when I see someone who looks like a loach. Like someone like you. A loach? Mount Hua has been lucky till now, but that's only because you haven't met the real deal. But you are out of luck now. I'm different from those idiots that dealt with Mount Hua yesterday. If you don't want to be shamed, you'd better back out now. Thanks for the advice. Baekchun shook his head. Yunjong, who was seated and squinting his eyes, looked at Baekchun. They seem so similar. Try to relax, Sahyung. It's too late to turn back now. What about a human's heart? As Yunjong and Jogul talked, gulping back their anxiousness, they watched their Sasuk, who was turning more and more into Chongmyung. Where did all this change come from? In the past, he was the Sasuk that they respected so much. Of course, they still respected him. The problem was that their feelings of respect had changed a little. Peng Do-won shrugged and continued. So still, enough. Huh? Baekchun sighed like he was tired. Come at me when you're done. It is boring here. You... Peng Do-wan lowered his sword from his shoulder and pointed it at Baekchun. You seem to think you are strong because you had some luck. Then I will show it to you clearly. Mount Hua, which had been cut off from the world once, can never be called a prestigious sect. At those arrogant words, Baekchun smiled. Prestigious? Yes. He scratched his head a couple of times and spoke sarcastically. If someone I knew had heard this, he would say something like this. What? Don't prestigious sects have heads? Baekchun straightened his sword and aimed for Peng Do-wan. Come here. I will break the head of a noble person then. Peng Do-wan's face turned red in an instant. He ground his teeth so much that it felt like they would be grounded down to nubs. You cheeky bastard! And finally, he held the sword tightly and ran towards Baekchun like an angry bull. I'll fix that head of yours! Baekchun narrowed his eyes. What the opponent was doing was quite stupid. But whether he was taught like this or not, the man did have a tremendous force. But this must be how it felt like. He seemed to know now how he appeared to others when they said he had changed. Thinking about it, it made him turn red in embarrassment. Those who haven't been able to get past the facade of being to a prestigious sect, clinging to it as their background, their source of meaning. Baekchun too had realized this only after Chungmyeong had broke his head. Then, Baekchun smiled. I didn't want to do this favor. What nonsense! Peng Do-wan jumped like a frog and slammed his sword down at Baekchun, the technique that the Hebei Peng family was the proudest of. It was the technique called the 5 Tigers Broken Door Blades Flying Tiger Killing Rabbit. The blade, embracing an intense red ki, fell toward Baekchun with great force. At the same time, Peng Do-wan's movements were following Baekchun. There's no use trying to avoid it. Unless one was an idiot, this technique that was already close would be avoided. No one would try and tackle it. Either way, once the opponent began to lose their energy, either through dodging or counterattacking, the blade would devour them. Then, with such successive attacks, he would win and leave a cut on the face of that. It was then Baekchun, who was staring at the blade of Peng Do-wan falling at him, slightly tilted the sword he was holding toward the back, and then, with a formidable force, he swung it at the incoming blade. Is he crazy? Peng Do-wan was shocked. Was he going to strike his blade with that thing? Even a 3-year-old would know this makes no sense. Fine, then don't blame me. Peng Do-wan pushed ki into the blade. Finally, his blade and Baekchun's sword collided. Kwang! A loud explosion-like sound echoed, and a man was bounced back and tossed onto the ground. That makes no sense! Cheers rose from everyone watching. Judging from the difference in body size and weight, it was normal for Baekchun to be on the losing end, but it was Peng Do-wan on the ground. As he fell, he raised his head with difficulty and looked at Baekchun. There was shock on his face. Baekchun lightly waved his sword and walked toward him. Unlike Peng Do-wan, who seemed to have hurt his arm during that one collision, Baekchun showed no visible wounds. At last, Baekchun stood in front of Peng Do-wan and said, "Yeah, you," and he gave some sincere advice. Need to do some real exercises. You are so weak that you wouldn't even be able to carry a bucket of water if you come to Mount Hua. Peng Do-wan was shocked. Weak? Me? He scanned his arm. The descendants of the Peng family were known to have amazing bodies, and he was amazingly well grown for his age. His size was enough to make others bow to him. And he was called weak. Peng Do-wan didn't understand, and Baekchun rolled up his sleeves. His muscles were shocking. Muscles trained through hell. Peng Do-wan, who saw that, got up. Where in the world does the dog like... Huh? Dog? Right. That puts my mind at ease.
Huh?
Baekchun turned his hand upside down and hit Baek Do-won on the back of his head. There was the sound of a watermelon being cracked. Peng Do-won's mouth was wide open as if he had been frozen. The head, 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 head. After 5 consecutive blows, Peng Do-won went down with foam in his mouth. Baekchun, who caught a glimpse of the fallen, pushed his sword into his sheath and turned around. But after taking a few steps, he suddenly stopped on the spot as if he had missed something. And with a contorted face, he thought, I should have hit his head one more time. He shouted head 6 times and hit 5 times. I didn't learn it right.